But overall, I think right now we're at a bigger crossroads, which is Bitcoin just an asset for Bitcoin treasury companies, or is it money for the world? And is it something people spend? And even within Bitcoiner circles, there's sort of a heated discussion where, people are saying you should never spend your Bitcoin. And the other faction is saying you have to spend it and you should spend and replace, because that's how people get Bitcoin. If you don't spend your Bitcoin, no one will accept it and adopt it and learn about it.
And where do you land on that spectrum?
Well, I think Bitcoin is both, and you have to be okay with people treating it as an asset. So there's no real direct parallel to this. If you look at gold, people were spending gold in history. They would spend it as gold coins and buy shoes with it or bread with it, or like lower derivatives of gold like silver and copper, right? But the main point is you would transact it and spend it, but at the same time, people do hoard it as well. And I think the difference is a bit more pronounced with Bitcoin because it's underpinning much of the financial system now, because it has to. Institutions, governments, corporations, they're all looking for a pristine asset that's not going to degrade and devalue over time. So that's why companies like Strategy and others are adding it to their balance sheet, and governments too. But at the same time, you have the rest of the world, which needs money. They need liquid money that can be spent to pay their suppliers, to pay vendors, to move around quickly, in addition to stablecoins too. But they're looking for something to use as money. So both sides are actively pushing both use cases, the medium of exchange and the store of value use case. So I think you'll see it end equilibrium where it does turn out to be both, and it is really good at being both things, and it's not necessarily one or the other. And even if BlackRock and Strategy and others have a large holding of Bitcoin, you're always going to have Bitcoin in the wild and being used by ordinary people to spend and use in their daily life. I would say in Western countries and more developed countries, it's probably going to tend to be more of an asset. You're going to see a lot of people's adoption of it, not as Bitcoin in a self-custodial Jade or cold card, but as something in their retirement portfolio or in a tax-advantaged account via an ETF or a Bitcoin treasury company. And in the developing world, you're going to see people, storing it on their phone and hopefully on a hardware wallet, but using it more as a bearer asset and a cash instrument.
Speaking of Bitcoin treasury companies, you recently warned on X that Bitcoin treasury companies that are led by CEOs who don't really understand Bitcoin, they'll fold at the first major drawdown. Is this a concern that we should have as the Bitcoin community?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that tweet kind of blew up. I didn't expect it would go that big, but apparently people do agree with that sentiment. And it probably has to do with a lot of the follow-on effect of strategy copycats. And you just have more and more companies saying, we're buying Bitcoin, and you don't really know if they understand Bitcoin, right? They may just be following a trend. And you can see the degeneration of that trend too with things like Solana and Ripple treasury companies now too. Like, that's not going to end well, guaranteed. But my concern is like a lot of these companies with people you never know of just saying we're buying Bitcoin. If they don't understand what it is they bought and why Bitcoin is valuable, they're probably going to fold. Or they haven't spent the effort to convince their board to get on board, no pun intended. And they might get pressure from their board to sell when the price goes down a bit. I know one of the big things Michael Saylor did was he spent time educating the strategy board on Bitcoin. So even when there was a downturn, we had a bear market and, we went down to like 16K. Strategy was holding through that. So they're able to withstand it because they understood, and Michael understood it, of course. And I think that is something that we have not seen with a lot of the copycats just yet. I still remember when we hit 16K, I texted Michael and I said, are you okay? Do you want to talk? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. So, there's confidence in Strategy's ability to weather these dips if there are more dips in the future.
There is all this demand, but it's got people screaming on Twitter, there's got to be paper Bitcoin. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being purchased on an almost daily basis. Why isn't the price exploding? So what do you have to say to all this?
I think there's probably some dimension of paper Bitcoin involved. There could be something shady happening. We just don't know. And it's the same as in the FTX case where we found out after the fact that they were selling Bitcoin that they didn't have. So it's possible, like some exchange and in some, the lesser known exchange is selling paper Bitcoin. And for some reason, there is not a run on that exchange yet. And that could contribute to this. The other theory is that it's simply OGs selling, but I don't know of any OGs that are selling, so it's difficult to really understand exactly what is going on. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility that there is some outright fraud and some exchanges taking advantage of this selling Bitcoin that does not exist.
Do you think that if Bitcoin treasury companies publish their proof of reserves, that would help solve this problem somewhat?
It's nice to have it, but it doesn't really solve the problem because you don't know their liabilities at any given time. So they may be able to produce the proof of reserves that they have this and it's with Coinbase, but you don't know the full story of if there's rehypothecation or if there's some other deals or there's some claim on their Bitcoin. And if every single one did publish the proof of reserves, I think the clarity of the situation would be very much improved. But then you kind of need everyone to do it so you know that no one's double claiming Bitcoin to be held as theirs.
And is Jan3 your company? Are you guys a Bitcoin treasury company?
We do have a Bitcoin treasury. I think we have 12 coins. So nice. As part of our seed fundraising, we put some of that into Bitcoin. I think our price was 85,000 a coin. So our treasury is doing okay.
Do you think that this tokenization of everything is coming to Bitcoin, and what does that world look like?
Yeah, so I would say I'm less certain now and than when I talked to Preston a few years back. And I think it largely has to do with the shifts that we've seen in corporate adoption and the traditional market. So Bitcoin is now far more accessible in traditional stocks, and they have a large lead on tokenized stocks because they're getting easier and easier to trade. The windows of trading times are increasing, and a lot of the more traditional exchanges are looking at ways to tokenize so that they can get fully 24/7 and potentially bearer trading, which I think was the promise of securities, tokenized securities. But it's interesting to see the route that things have gone. I think Bitfinex Securities has played a large role in driving the tokenized securities narrative, and most of their offerings are on the Liquid network. And in fact, I think almost all of them are. But I believe we're lacking some larger issuances that can drive more attention, because it's like tokenized securities are the worst of both worlds. You have to deal with the bearer aspect of it, and you have less liquidity than the traditional market. So there has to be some big draw to it. And originally I was thinking Bitcoin bonds issued by sovereign states could be a big driver, because you'll have a large pool of liquidity if there's a number of bonds issued, like billions of dollars of liquidity, and interest because it is Bitcoin backed. So basically Bitcoin bonds could have been like Strategy if they were executed on in 2022 or 2023. But I think that ship has sailed, and a lot of the interest now has shifted over to Strategy and its preferred stock offering. So the market for tokenized securities has changed a lot. And then, like you mentioned, you have Robinhood, and they're trying things on Solana and everything like that. But you can see the same thing. They're looking for stocks that people want exposure to, like OpenAI and SpaceX. But I think the key is to find a draw. But I'm still bullish on Liquid for tokenized securities. And I think one thing that could be interesting is tokenization of all the Bitcoin treasury companies, which has already happened. So there's CMSTR, and there is, I think, tokenized H100 as well. I'm not sure about AltBG, but Stoker, which is a Liquid member, they've been working with a large number of companies to tokenize these. So if there is enough demand for exposure to these tokenized stocks, then I think a marketplace like Bitfinex Securities or others could come up and allow for trading of those. So you might see it blow up in the future.
One thing you mentioned is Bit bonds, right? You were a instrumental part of the idea of the volcano bonds, and now we hear the idea of Bit bonds happening over at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Do you think that this will be adopted by countries, and what is their interest in this?
I think countries definitely need to do it, but again, the dynamic has changed a lot in the last few months, maybe the last year. And again, it is largely because of strategy. So I think strategy is largely what I had in mind for sovereign Bitcoin bonds or volcano bonds, where you would issue dollar debt, back it with Bitcoin, and get this flywheel going, and use proceeds to buy Bitcoin. So it's changed a lot. I think there's still opportunity probably for the US to do Bit bonds. For developing countries, that ship might have sailed by now, because that it is sovereign debt. It's not decentralized in any way. So you have to look at the credit rating and credit worthiness of a lot of these countries. And would you have bought triple B or C rated debt from a LATAM country if it was backed by Bitcoin? Maybe a few years ago, but you have strategy now with very similar offerings, especially with Strife. And if the US does issue Bit bonds, then you basically have, either triple B or low A rated US sovereign debt backed with Bitcoin, which is superior in almost every way to, a Bitcoin bond from a LATAM country that is struggling, right? So if the US does move ahead, then I think that might be the nail in the coffin for Bitcoin bonds elsewhere. There just won't be demand for it unless they find a way to increase the yield, but then that comes with its own risks.